Hello and welcome to our SLB roundtable discussion this week, International Women's Day, and to celebrate it, I'm pleased to say that I'm hosting a couple of our fellow Super League basketball directors for a bit of a chat. So please welcome Sarah Backovic, who is CEO of Sheffield Sharks basketball and shareholder of both the men and the women's pro teams there, and alongside her Jodie Jackson, who is co-owner of the new Surrey franchise, the 89ers. Good afternoon, ladies. Nice to have you here.
Hi, Lisa. Happy to be here.
Yeah, good to have you on this week, and it is quite interesting to be able to chat to you guys, especially given as we sit as directors on the Super League basketball. More than a third of our directors are female, so we're definitely punching above our weight across board diversity on that front. I must admit, it's coincidental that we're hosting this chat this week. I sort of slightly feel like Eddie Hearn ahead of the Eubank Ben fight, with both of you facing off against each other at the weekend. How are the nerves? Sarah, you're a seasoned pro at this. I've lost count of how many finals Sheffield have been in.
I think we all have, and I didn't mean that to sound as arrogant as it probably did. But we've been around a long time, so needless to say, we've had a few. Of course, we're nervous. Every final is a must win, and everything's on the line, and anything can happen on the day. So of course we're nervous, but looking forward to the day. It should be fun.
And Jodie, of course, for you, it's a first time because it's a new franchise.
It is, yeah. Very excited. Yep. Just excited to have made it and battle against Sarah, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's always quite nice to be the underdog, isn't it? I mean, that's kind of no offence to the 89ers, but that's probably how you're approaching it, I presume.
I'll take that. I want to be the underdog. So the sneaky underdog that wins.
Well, may the best team win on Sunday. Bristol Flyers sadly not represented there on Sunday, but I'm sure it will be a fantastic occasion. And, another great occasion to showcase the women's and the men's professional sport. Sarah, probably for you with Hatters, it's a big day as well.
It is. It's a phenomenal achievement just to be there, to be honest, with both teams, because it's both leagues are very tough, and any opponent can beat anybody on any given day. So to have both the men and the women there is a very proud moment, irrespective of what the outcomes are of those games. I'm super proud of both teams.
Well, I know it's been a bit of a roller coaster year for all of us, I think is probably the understatement of the century. Going from the formation of SLB last summer and the new teams, the new franchises, and also, as I mentioned, this new board. And it is fairly refreshing. I think all of us sit on various different boards and have done over previous years. And it's very refreshing to be surrounded by such a lovely, strong group of women alongside me. I mean, there's both of you and, of course, Denise White, the Cheshire Phoenix owner, who was unable to join us today. But, having four of us across that board of 9, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? I mean, Sarah, I'll come to you first because you've sat on quite a lot of different boards and had so many years of experience within basketball particularly. The discussions that happen behind closed doors, they definitely take on a different style, I've noticed, when you've got that mixture.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just a slightly different dynamic to what I was first used to when I was all alone in that boardroom with everybody else being men. And of course, it was quite dominated by men. So, and all the conversation was quite aggressive and so on and so forth. And I think adding in more and more women has been able to sort of temper that dynamic and, create much more of a relaxed focus, albeit a focus, on what we need to do next. But, it's been an enjoyable evolution to see more and more women join the board and create a much more comfortable environment.
And Jodie, for you, in terms of sitting as a director on the board, I mean, it's been a really steep learning curve for you from making that transition from, you were head of professional sport at Surrey Sports Park to making the leap with Dan Clark, your business partner and GB basketball legend, to actually create the new 89ers.
Yeah, I mean, that was a jump that I don't think you really understand until you've made it. I think I'm really lucky in the sense that when I joined, you both were already there. So you already had 2 strong female role models on the board already. And then Denise joined, obviously, this season. But yeah, very, very different from being an employee of a big business to the owner of a not so big business.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting though, the board dynamic. I mean, in terms of, there is quite a mixture of experience. You know, you've got, they won't mind me saying, the stalwarts. You know, Sheffield, obviously one of the longest established teams, alongside, you know, the likes of Kevin Routledge with Leicester and Paul Blake up at Newcastle. And then the slightly newer ones coming in, I'd probably class Bristol Flyers and Caledonia and Surrey in that. And then the new investment as well that's come on board. It is a very different dynamic board to probably what it has been over the last few years, and probably for the greater good. I think, Sarah, you touched on it there. It's a very different experience. You know, Jodie and I were probably fairly lucky that you were already established in it.
Yeah, I took the punches. I do definitely. I mean, Paul Blake, for example, and I were contemporaries, so we kind of grew up on the board together and learned and evolved our roles, if you will. And as you say, over periods of time, you become more and more experienced in what to expect in that type of environment. I mean, it wasn't just the fact that I probably was one of the few, if not a lone woman most of the time. There were periods where a woman would appear and then disappear, you know, a few months later. And I don't think that was anything personal, but I think it was just their position at the time. But there were women along the way that came and went, but predominantly I would be on my own. And it is quite I would say for most people probably very intimidating to come into an environment like that, and being quite young as well. I was relatively young, obviously, to what I am today, given that I've been there 30 years. So, you know, it was challenging, and you didn't feel you could be as communicative as I am today, or, you know, I don't know how we want to phrase that, but having more and more women join the board, you can tell there's a softening, there's a preparedness to listen more, whereas previously it was, you know, very much, you know, we know what we're doing, and that's a generational thing. I think certain, you know, obviously 30 years ago, I mean, Kevin is the constant who's been there through all that time predominantly, and you know, and obviously he's our most senior member of the board and the most experienced, and a pioneer in many ways in terms of establishing his arena first, and having the type of experience that he has as a businessman, let alone a basketball impresario. But he was definitely intimidating, you know, when I was first there. Whereas now I understand how much I've learned from those guys. And how best to handle, you know, the way forward or the way through that environment to what we have today.
Yeah, and I mean, it is interesting, not to point on ages, but obviously in terms of experience, there's that, you know, we've got Denise, we've got yourself, me, and Jodie, and it is interesting seeing, and I see it probably across the group of sports as well, that where I work with in Bristol, the number of women coming into professional men's sport. I think it's had quite a seismic shift over the last, I would probably say 5 to 7 years. And I don't know, Jodie, obviously you've been coming up through the ranks as well. As I know Dominique over at Manchester is there. You mentioned Paul Blake there. Obviously Sam has been alongside him working out at Newcastle, running the foundation side of the Eagles project, I think for, you know, equal number of years. Jodie, is it something that you've found it isn't intimidating, or as intimidating because you can see other women? You know, so often it's talked about, you know, to see it to be it.
I think definitely as the years gone on, when I was like still at university, when I was like 19, 20, I did a placement year at Harlequins rugby team, and then you're talking 15, 16 years later.
At the men's team?
I think, yeah, and it's a very different environment. And obviously I think your position within those clubs is also a big factor. If you're coming in and you're already a more senior female within the franchise, I think everyone's used to you being around versus someone newer and younger, lower down. But I don't think it should matter. I just think you need to understand the way that the franchise works, and it's all down to the way that the leadership, whether they're male or female, handle any new people coming through. And it needs to be taken, you know, seriously, that everyone gets on and everyone respects each other. It just so happens that men and women it's always looked at gender, but actually it's experience as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you both, because you've both been involved. Sarah's been at the sharp end and has delivered it, lucky her. The kind of medical arena of unveiling your beautiful new arena. We're hopefully going to be breaking ground a bit later this year. And Jodie, obviously, with Surrey, there's always been plans to try and work out, a long-term arena venue. And all of us within the league are looking at investing. We've had Caledonia's new arena that opened as well in recent years. I always find it interesting when venues are being designed and the designs of the past don't probably fit the designs of now, and that how do we attract the female fans to men's and women's sport, but actually catering for those female fans that might conceivably want to come and watch sport, whereas that probably wasn't considered 50 years ago.
No, and I think also, I mean, a lot goes in at the design stage, does it not? When you're working with architects, and our architects for Academy Medical Arena were a group, that included women. So that type of consideration, and also the aesthetics of the arena, making it more appealing, making it more comfortable for families, really was the dynamic that we were looking at. It wasn't just, to perhaps make it a better environment for women, but in fact for the family. So for parents, be it single or coupled, with young children or older children, how does this arena appeal to them so that they want to come back week after week, event after an event, whether that's basketball or any of the other events that we host here. And I think, at the architect stage, that was a consideration. That was part of the brief. We need a welcoming environment that's not over masculine, that doesn't put people off going, that is catered for. And I don't think that's exclusive to women. I think men want that too. They want to be able to take their children into a safe and comfortable and welcoming environment, and that's what we strove for.
Jodie?
I can only dream of having those discussions at the moment. I'd love to. Do you know what though? It's been really nice to sort of see all of the different arenas across the league, and you kind of pick up little things from each one. So it's almost like you can take certain parts of everyone and go, "Oh, quite like that. We quite like that," and then build something new. So it's actually really exciting to see. It'll be really exciting to see what Bristol's looks like. Obviously, seeing the kind of drawings and everything, but you pick up on that. And although we don't have one right now, it's exciting to think that could be something in our future.
Yeah, I mean, it is.
I also think that, sorry, Lisa, but I also think that every time that we build another arena within our framework of clubs, they just have something extra, something different, something unique to that club. And we're excited by every facility. We were excited by Leicester's facility. We were excited by Newcastle's facility. It was fascinating to go up to see what Scotland did. Steve Timoney did up in Scotland, because he did it so quickly. He literally transformed basically almost like a warehouse type size of a facility into what it looks like today, which is phenomenal. I mean, his public area is absolutely superb. It's second to none. And ticks all those aforementioned boxes of making it a welcoming environment and an accessible environment, making it, all the things that would encourage people to go there on a weekly basis. And then of course, our own arena had those same considerations. So we're super excited to see what Bristol do when they break ground. And obviously then by the time we've moved on to Surrey, which, we're all 100 or 1,000% behind, it'll be another improvement again. So, it's exciting to watch how it evolves.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about, sorry, I was just going to say, the evolution where you talk to architects and things. It's interesting when the stadium, the arena in Bristol will be built next to the Ashton Gate Stadium. When that was redesigned back in, the rebuild started in 2014, so 10 years ago, there wasn't, I don't remember much of a conversation around dressing rooms, changing rooms. And one of the problems that has evolved, lovely problem to have, is that women's teams are now playing at the main stadium in football and rugby. Quite frequently, our City women play here week in, week out. This is their home ground. But actually, when it comes to doing double headers, it becomes a different challenge, because how do you have that number of home and away dressing rooms? Effectively you need double the number, and for the men and women as well, which often isn't feasible. But it's quite nice that we're actually all starting to have these challenges and discussions, because, like I said, a number of decades ago, it wasn't even a consideration that women would be playing, either at the same venue but also at the same level in terms of professionalism.
Yeah, that's true. And that's, and it's interesting, the locker room environment, because once upon a time it was quite distinct between a male and female changing room, whereas now there's less distinction between the two. The type of things that were requested of us, and we did a lot of that sort of like, I guess, study of what was the most important thing to anybody using a locker room, and it was privacy, and and that was from the male and the females. So putting showers, cubicles instead of open showers, and all that kind of thing was more important to the users, and it didn't matter what sex that was. And when we go back a step, when you talk about how things have changed over the last sort of 5 to 7 years in terms of, women being more present in every environment that we're talking about in terms of professional sport, it is, it was a long time coming, that they would break that ceiling and be accepted as, as being as capable as their male counterparts, as intelligent, as innovative, if not more so. And I always used to say that if you want to be like a man, you lack ambition. Because as a woman, it's we're already as good as anybody out there, male or female. It's about your own confidence to be able to take that forward.
Yeah, and that confidence piece is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think men and women often feel at times out of place. Imposter syndrome is applied to both men and women at times. And I did hear a really interesting quote from one of our rugby players, was interviewed on one of the American networks, and she's a US player playing for the Bears, and she was asked about imposter syndrome and how does she cope with it. And Ilona Maher just sort of looked slightly nonplussed at the interviewer, as if they'd just landed from Mars, because she was like, no, I don't suffer from that. And I thought, God, how refreshing to have someone that was, she wasn't being arrogant, but she was like, I've trained all my life to get to here. I own, I absolutely deserve this space. I own this space because I have trained and I have worked and I have studied really hard to get to here. And it is interesting, because I do think probably it is a refrain more often by women than men to admit their frailties or their concerns, but that doesn't necessarily make them weaker. I don't know, Jodie or Sarah, either one of you got a view on that?
It's definitely something I've had before, and still have. I think especially as like my role changed and you entered into the board environment, you're suddenly, like I said, really lucky to have both of you there when I went into the board in like 2023, but also you're kind of like, I've never been an equal on a board. I've always been like presenting to a board, so that kind of going in and going, I've got all these people around me that have years and years more experience than I do. I'm there with Dan, who's got obviously a huge background in the sport and has very much deserved all of the accolades that he's got, and I'm sort of sat there kind of having an equal vote, an equal say in everything. So I can understand it. I do wish though that I had the confidence that she has to just go, I deserve to be here.
But does Dan have that? I mean, it's like, obviously Dan was a phenomenal player, but he didn't have business or board experience. Did he ever come out and go, God, I've got complete imposter syndrome, I don't feel like I should be there?
No. No, I don't think so. He'll just be like, he just knows it so much, and it's been around it such a long time. And I think to be a successful player, as per your the rugby player on your team, like, you've just got to have that confidence in yourself. You're never going to make it to a high level if you don't back yourself. And so I think he's got that. But that actually really helps me, because you sort of see that and you're like, well, you don't know either. So I'm on about myself.
That's right. And oftentimes most people don't know something. So when we're sat around a board, irrespective if you're the elder statesperson or the new kid on the block, somebody along that spectrum doesn't know what you're talking about at that moment in time, and it depends on what it is. And I think, the great thing about getting older, if there is a great thing about getting older, is that you lose all those inhibitions along the way. And you recognize that actually whether you know something or subject really well or you don't know anything about it is irrelevant, because if you don't know anything about it, it's fine to admit that and learn, and then you suddenly do know that, and it goes that's how it goes. And so the confidence grows with that knowledge and that acceptance that you can't possibly know everything. But what you do know, and you can present that well and confidently. And I think you do that, Jodie, if I'm honest, when we're sat on boards, that you make some extremely valid points all the time. And you can see the light go on around the table, So, I think you do.
With a killer point at the end, doesn't she, where she sat quietly and then she just says something and everyone goes, oh, yeah, no, why didn't we point that out?
Oh, yeah, we forgot about that.
So, be the underdog.
It is interesting though, Sarah. You mentioned that is one of the benefits of getting older, is you definitely care slightly less about what people think of you. I mean, I know I'm guilty often of saying this is probably a silly question. I don't think I've ever heard a man say this is probably a silly question, but I think we always sort of think, oh gosh, do we need to caveat it or preface it with, maybe I'm not quite sure. But the one thing I've learned from the experiences of various boards is like you say, Sarah, that there isn't really a silly question, and actually better to say it and check, because there's a straightforward offer, and I think we've been very lucky. I think the people that we work alongside are very thoughtful, respectful, very open to listening to all of our ideas, and the melting pot that has come out of SLB. I think I think it is a very respectful environment, very different to probably a previous one that we all lived through no fault.
I think also it used to be a case of there was an illusion of democracy in the past, wasn't there? It was like, well, what's your thoughts, and then we're going to do what I want, and that's how our board was often run. And there are still boards today run like that, apparently, where it doesn't really matter what your opinion is, only one person's making that decision, and that's how it was commonplace back in the day. But nowadays, that is less so. It's very rare. And somebody once said to me, do you think you are a queen bee? And I didn't understand what that was. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And apparently a queen bee is a woman that's achieved success but doesn't help other women to achieve success. And, and I just thought to myself, well, that question in itself is a put down. That's almost saying, well, you've been successful, but you're not making everybody else who's female successful. Well, success comes with opportunity, and if you give people opportunities and they don't take it or they don't succeed through it, then that can't be the responsibility of every woman who's been successful, who's achieved success. Yeah. So, we've got to be cognizant of that. That as women, that we are not creating more labels as if we haven't had enough, enough bestowed upon us. We don't want to create more labels to put more barriers in place from women having the confidence to go out there and be successful and make a successful contribution to any board or any business that they're part of.
And that semantics and language, I mean, obviously, I always joke about the fact that, I come from a language background rather than the, Excel spreadsheet world, but the words and semantics are so critical. And like you say, that question, normally when I get asked a question that is slightly mildly offensive, I say, well, would you be asking the same question of a man? And I don't think that terminology, there isn't even a terminology for that for a man. So, that's a non-starter. But also that, and I was probably being slightly tricky, Jodie, when you said about Harlequins, because we have all grown up in a world where a reference to a sports team, the very first starting point is the male reference. You know, with the England team, everyone, you know, traditionally thought of the England men's football team. And, you know, certainly within our sporting group, we've worked really, really hard to make sure that when we are referring to Bristol City, if there isn't a picture or video of a player or a person, and then it's fairly obvious that it's a male or a female, if there isn't that, then we say Bristol City men, Bristol City women. And that's going to take a long, long while to get to. Same with Bristol Bears. It's Bristol Bears men, Bristol Bears women. But most of the time in this world of digital, we've got an image or a video that shows it's either the men or the women. So the women don't have to be referred to as Bristol Bears women. They can just be Bristol Bears if there's pictures alongside it. But it's all of those sort of those unconscious, subtle biases that are that gear change and that shift change that is going to come probably at some point, but it's probably going to take another 20 years.
I remember we had that discussion when we were talking about when we were branding the SLB, and then we were talking about the women's league as well, and then it became SL, like Super League Basketball Men's, Super League Basketball Women's. So it's quite interesting in that branding as well. Well, we said we'd got an opportunity to start a league from scratch, which is an incredible opportunity to be able to step forward, you know, with Jim Saker, chair for Super League Basketball Women, you know, trying to talk, you know, you got obviously Sheffield, you've got the Hatters, there's a number of clubs in SLB that have got, you know, their equivalent female counterparts. And that it's very much been set up in that view that SLB, M and W coexist together and they move forward equally. I mean, Sarah, you've probably got more on that than Jodie and I, because you operate a women's team as well.
You know what? It's a little bit of a challenge. I mean, we try to be as equal as you can possibly be when you're operating a male and a female team under the same roof. And unfortunately, in our particular sport, the men's game is more progressed than the women's game is, certainly commercially, audience-wise. But in terms of enjoyment of competition, I don't see the difference between the two. They're both as entertaining and slightly different. The women's game is far more technical and technically capable, and the men's game is far more athletic. But it is a gap that's sort of narrowing, if you will, you know, as the women's game has more of a pool to choose from, and that more athletic women are participating in basketball, which is probably, you know, our job in terms of development, is to make sure that those opportunities are there for young girls who want to play basketball. It's really challenging to make sure that we break down this barrier of them and us, they get this, we get that. You know, you try so hard to avoid it in every single way, and we try and make it as equitable as possible. But it is difficult at times because of those sorts of gaps, and you've just got to be realistic in those circumstances. What can be given equally is given equally, and then sometimes, you know, it isn't quite that equal. But that really comes down to,
isn't it?
Well, quite. It's just down to the commercials.
Yeah, and giving everyone an opportunity to, you know, we echo that here within football and rugby. You know, you have the opportunity and would love to everything to be divided equally, but unfortunately, the commercials don't stack up. You know, the numbers in discrepancy between attendances, and you know, I know I alluded to it a moment ago about, you know, we won't see the real changes coming through in language in the next 20 years. I think it's going to take probably at least another 5 years for the crowds to get to a level where it is truly commercially viable for football, rugby, basketball, for all sorts of sports. Probably the only outlier is netball, because it's traditionally been, you know, a female-led, a female-only sport. I know that is changing, but that's probably the only one that I could name off the top of my head that is a difference.
Yeah, and I think that's really comes down to participation numbers, doesn't it? So the more we can do our job on the ground and swell those participation numbers, the more likely those audiences are going to grow, and the more likely we're going to see more and more talented women at the top of the game that are, you know, massively entertaining. And you're seeing it in the WNBA more so, you know, in terms of basketball, you're seeing the crowds grow and the interest in the game grow. You're seeing it in women's football, and you've seen it leaps and bounds over the last few years in women's football. So, it is a case of swelling that participation program up and making sure that we can keep building. And we are probably 20 years behind in terms of progress as to where the men were, but maybe not. We can accelerate that gap.
Yeah, if the trajectory of football is anything to follow, certainly. And I do think you touched on an interesting point there, Sarah, about the competitive sport or grassroots sort of sport participation and how critical. I mean, I know we've all spoken behind the scenes about how important it is for kids to be involved in sport, boys and girls, and how, as basketball, how do we grow that grassroots participation? And I know, you guys and the rest of the SLB clubs do huge amounts of community work to try and progress the sport. But Sarah, what you said there about that coming through sport, it is interesting seeing the number of women that I know that work in elite professional sport. I would probably say, as a guesstimate, over 90% all were either athletes of a high level or certainly a decent level that have then gone on to work in sport. And I don't know if that was either of your background, Sarah. I think you came from a very sporting family that were always involved in, with Ponds Forge and that background. Jodie, I don't know your pathway into it.
Not as an athlete, I'll be honest. I think my route into it was a little bit more around being lucky to have worked in a facility that had professional teams, and then just slowly getting more and more involved in it. And I guess having the people around me and the confidence to be able to say, I think we could do this to improve it, and then learning from all the people around me. I'd say when we found out about the change in the Surrey franchise over the summer, bar Dan, who was obviously the first phone call, the second phone call was Sarah, and it's just how can we do this? It wasn't a should we, it was a how can we do this? And lucky to have people around that you would learn from. So I think it's just embracing the environment and actually going, I don't think I needed to have been an athlete to be able to survive in this environment. But the other way, I mean, if you're an athlete going into a business setting, that must be challenging in a completely different way as well.
But then you've got Dan alongside you, so you've got the perfect complement. You've got the athlete, you've got the pro athlete, and you've got your, the commercial and business brains that you've had coming up through Surrey. Perfect partnership. There you go, Jodie. Sarah, in terms of yours, I mean, like I said, you came from a sporting family, very much involved in the sporting community in Sheffield.
Yes, it was. Well, it starts with my father, who was a director of sport in Sheffield, director of sport for the World Student Games and director of sport for the Commonwealth Games in Manchester, to name but a few. And that's really kind of what sucked me into sports administration, really, and sponsorship. Swerved me from what could have been a lucrative career into a sporting career.
In law.
Yeah, but I had a fantastic journey all the way through and had amazing experiences. And the thing about sport that I don't think anybody who's involved can deny, you make incredible friendships throughout your journey, whatever your journey is, whether it's an administrative role or whether you're an athlete or whether you're a support member of staff. This just the whole environment of sport can really bring you personal confidence that if you don't continue a career in sport and you move into the professional world, will give you so many advantages, of how to feel about yourself, how to perceive others, how to work with others, and how best to communicate. And all those things come very easily through sport, which is why sport's such a great vehicle for learning, whether that's to re-engage young people through educational programs or to look at behavioral issues and how that can be worked upon through sport. There's so many ways that sport is used as a vehicle to improve lives. But my background was, I was a swimmer when I was younger and competed at that level. And then obviously, once I moved into the, if you will, like the family business, if you like, with my father and also Yuri Matisham, that was my entry into sports sponsorship and contracting. So it was
Still
use some of the skills, but
you've used a lot of those skills over the last year, Sarah. We've definitely noticed the renegotiating of contracts when the SLB was formed last summer. There was a lot of collective rolling up of sleeves, and every owner and director getting involved. And I know you were heavily involved in those commercial pieces, and yeah, like you say, it helps having that background and depth of knowledge to draw from.
It does, and the question has often been asked as to how the SLB was turned around so quickly, and it was quite simply because we do have an extraordinary board of people with different talents that when you put them all together, you could turn a league around in 6-7 weeks. And then the new investors that came in are all extraordinary people. And the thing about the investors thus far that I admire is that their passion is basketball. They have not come in as business people trying to suck out the energy of the sport, trying to take all the financial wealth out of the sport. That they're not interested in it. They're interested in helping it and putting the sport onto the level where it deserves to be in this country, and they're very passionate about the game, and that's a really, really important part of making sports successful. If you've got it in the heart first and foremost, and then obviously you've got the capability of developing that as a business, then you're onto a winner.
Yeah, it certainly feels like we're greater than the sum of our parts, and I feel very fortunate that we get to work alongside such a dynamic and interesting group of people. We've mentioned Denise as the owner of Cheshire, but with the male counterparts, the new investments are into Sheffield, bringing Vaughan Millett, who's our interim chair of the SLB, Ben Pearson buying into Manchester via the Sherwood Group, Lens in London, and then alongside more stable ownership of Paul Blake at Newcastle, Kevin at Leicester, and Steve Timoney over in Glasgow. Everyone shares that passion and that development, and as you say, is so much more in it for the development of the greater good of the sport, and basketball has really got under the skin of everyone, even though perhaps some of them didn't come via a basketball route. I certainly didn't. I don't think Ben Pearson did. But actually, the focus is about how we develop this sport to the best it can possibly be via a fantastic board.
100%, yeah. I think as well, like just to go on your point just before, I think someone like Denise coming into the board, I think not only another female, but also like a cultural difference. I find her like she just always wants to understand, and I find like the confidence of her just going, can I ask a question? Can we just clarify? I find that really a nice thing to see on a board, like especially from a female. Like not that we don't ask questions, but she brings like a completely different background as well. So I think that's has been a really interesting addition to the board. This year I'd just like to get to the end and.
With some silverware, this Sunday.
I've won the cup, playoffs, doing very great fun. Just really excited at the fact that we were able to continue. So I think it's, in your first year, you always find you didn't quite think of everything, and you get hit with some roadblocks along the way. So I think it's just having a full year of like owning it and having the responsibility of everything. Very lucky that we could ring up any other club at any point, and there's the only real contention is on the court, and off the court everyone wants to help each other. So I think that's been a huge thing in our success. But yeah, just excited, like you say, don't rebrand, don't change colours, anything like that. It would be really great to just have some stability.
Yeah.
Not to be the to kill the Cinderella story, but I do think that Surrey are an extraordinary survivalist, if you will, in this whole change of league, and what Dan and Jodie have achieved. People need to understand out there that is extremely difficult to do. It's extremely difficult to go from a standing start and achieve what they've achieved. And that makes their finalist appearance all the more impressive, as to what they've done. So I doff my cap to both of them. And I'd go back to the Denise White question, because Denise White is an extraordinary person. Her background is super impressive. And her modesty and how she deals, humility, if you will, and how she communicates with us all is encouraging and a great example of what a great woman can achieve.
Hear to that. She is. I think we all look at role models and mentors, and I think she's been one to all of us, and has been very giving with her time. And we look forward to having her in one of the chats soon. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible today, but echo that completely. Well, I think we will need to leave it there because I know both of you have got other things to be getting on with, not least preparations for the Cup final. So best of luck to both of you. May the best team win. And thank you very much for joining us for International Women's Day.